I would appreciate it if you could show your support by liking and subscribing to the video before you start watching. You're standing on what was once the edge of the world. 40,000 years ago, this landscape would have killed you in minutes. The wind cuts through the air at minus 50 degrees Celsius, carrying ice crystals that feel like razors against exposed skin. Above you, glaciers stretch endlessly toward a pale, merciless sky. Below your feet, the ground is frozen solid down to depths of over 6 feet. This is northern Europe during the last glacial maximum, a continent buried under ice sheets 2 miles thick. Yet somehow, impossibly, humans not only reached this frozen wasteland, but thrived here for millennia. We think we know what early humans were like. Primitive cave dwellers huddled around flickering fires, barely surviving day to day. But the truth is far more extraordinary. The people who conquered Ice Age Europe possessed technological sophistication that wouldn't be matched again for thousands of years. They developed multi-layered clothing systems more advanced than modern Arctic gear, engineered underground heating networks that could warm entire communities, and mastered construction techniques that turned snow itself into fortress-like shelters. Picture this. In what is now Germany, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of settlements where families lived comfortably through winters that would have frozen the blood in their veins. These weren't desperate survivors clinging to life. These were master engineers who looked at the most hostile environment on Earth and made it home. The Gravettian culture, spanning from 28,000 to 22,000 years ago, represents one of humanity's greatest triumphs over nature. These people didn't just survive the ice, they conquered it. But how did they do it? How did beings with the same basic physiology as modern humans develop technology so advanced that it enabled them to flourish where today's experts would perish within hours? The answer lies in 3 revolutionary innovations that changed everything. Clothing systems so sophisticated they created personal microclimates, fuel technologies that could generate sustained heat in sub-zero conditions, and architectural techniques that transformed deadly snow into life-saving shelter. Each breakthrough built upon the last, creating a survival system so effective that it allowed human civilization to take root in the planet's most unforgiving landscape. Consider this shocking fact. The bone needles discovered at Gravettian sites are so precisely crafted that they match the quality of modern surgical instruments. These weren't crude tools. They were precision implements used to create garments with seam tolerances measured in millimeters. The difference between life and death in minus 50 degrees, whether to come down to a single poorly sewn stitch. But the most remarkable discovery of all came in 1997, when researchers excavating a Gravettian site in the Czech Republic found something that challenged everything we thought we knew about Ice Age technology. Buried beneath layers of permafrost, perfectly preserved for 30,000 years, lay the remains of heating systems so advanced that modern engineers initially refused to believe it could work. Yet, when they reconstructed it using only materials available to Ice Age humans, it not only worked, it outperformed contemporary designs. These weren't lucky accidents or simple adaptations. Every technique, every tool, every innovation represented generations of accumulated knowledge passed down through bloodlines and tested against the ultimate judge, survival at the edge of the world. Families who got it wrong simply vanished into the ice, leaving no trace. Those who perfected these technologies became the ancestors of everyone who would follow. The stakes couldn't have been higher. During the depths of the Ice Age, summer temperatures in northern Europe rarely climbed above freezing. Winter brought conditions that would make modern Antarctica seem hospitable. Yet archaeological evidence shows these communities not just surviving, but actively expanding their territories, developing art, music, and complex social structures that would lay the foundation for human civilization. This is the story of humanity's first great technological revolution. Not the invention of agriculture or the wheel, but the mastery of survival itself. It's the story of people who looked at an environment designed to kill and decided to call it home. And it's a story that begins with the simple yet revolutionary discovery that sometimes the key to surviving the cold isn't fighting it. It's learning to live inside it. But this was only the beginning of their extraordinary journey into frozen unknown. 28,000 years ago, a band of hunters stood at the southern edge of the great ice sheets that covered northern Europe. Behind them lay the familiar warmth of the Mediterranean regions where their ancestors had lived for millennia. Ahead stretched an alien landscape of endless white, where the very air could freeze the moisture in your lungs, and where a single mistake meant certain death. These were the Gravettian people, named after a French archaeological site, where their distinctive stone tools were first discovered in 1869. But to understand who they really were, you need to imagine the impossible courage it took to be the first humans to push north into territory no living creature had ever survived. Archaeological evidence from sites across modern-day Germany, Poland, and the Czech Republic reveals that these pioneers weren't desperate refugees fleeing some southern catastrophe. They were explorers, systematic, methodical, and extraordinarily well-prepared for challenges ahead. Carbon dating of their settlements shows they didn't stumble into the frozen north by accident. They planned their expansion over generations, developing technologies specifically designed for Arctic survival. These people possessed knowledge that modern survival experts can barely comprehend, notes Dr. Marjolaine Bosch from Leiden University, who has spent decades studying Gravettian artifacts. They understood principles of thermodynamics, materials science, and engineering that we're only now beginning to fully appreciate. The first breakthrough came through necessity. They had to stay warm. But their solution went far beyond simply wearing animal skins. Excavations at the Pavlov site in the Czech Republic have revealed the remains of what can only be described as the world's first engineered clothing system. These weren't crude hides thrown over shoulders. They were carefully designed multi-layer garments with specific functions for each component. The base layer consisted of soft, processed rabbit fur worn directly against the skin. This wasn't random. Rabbit fur has unique properties that create insulating air pockets while wicking moisture away from the body. Over this came a middle layer of carefully tanned deer hide, processed using techniques that made it both waterproof and breathable. The outer layer was crafted from the thick winter coats of mammoths and woolly rhinoceros, animals whose fur had evolved specifically for Ice Age conditions. But here's what makes this truly remarkable. Each layer was connected to the others through an intricate system of drawstrings and fastenings that allowed the wearer to regulate temperature by adjusting airflow. Too warm during exertion? Loosen the connections to increase ventilation. Temperature dropping? Tighten everything down to create a sealed microenvironment. It was a personal climate control system made entirely from organic materials. The precision required for this technology is staggering. Bone needles found at Gravettian sites measure just 2 millimeters in diameter at their thickest point, with eyes so small they can barely accommodate modern synthetic thread. These needles were used to create seams with stitch densities of up to 12 per inch, finer than many modern garments. But clothing was just the beginning. The Gravettians also revolutionized the concept of fuel for heating. While earlier humans had relied on wood fires, what was essentially non-existent in the glacial landscape, instead, they turned to fat, specifically rendered animal fat that could burn steadily for hours at temperatures that would melt snow and ice. Archaeologists have discovered elaborate fat rendering stations at Gravettian sites, complete with specialized stone tools for processing blubber and marrow. They developed techniques for purifying fat to remove water content, creating a fuel that burned clean and hot. A single mammoth could provide enough processed fat to heat a shelter for an entire winter. The most ingenious innovation was their lamp technology. These weren't crude bowls with floating wicks. Gravettian lamps were precision instruments carved from stone, with carefully calculated chamber sizes and wick positioning that maximized heat output while minimizing fuel consumption. Some examples show evidence of adjustable airflow systems that allowed the user to control flame intensity with remarkable precision. When we tested reconstructions of these lamps using period materials and techniques, we were amazed, explains Dr. Jean-Philippe Ergaud from the University of Bordeaux. They produce more heat per unit of fuel than many modern camping stoves, and they could maintain consistent temperatures for up to 18 hours on a single filling. But perhaps most remarkably, the Gravettians understood that survival in extreme cold wasn't just about individual preparation. It was about community cooperation. Their settlements show evidence of shared heating systems, communal food storage, and coordinated hunting strategies that allowed entire groups to survive conditions that would kill isolated individuals. These weren't primitive people making do with crude tools. They were sophisticated engineers who developed technology so effective that they allowed human expansion into environments previously considered uninhabitable. Their innovations would enable human civilization to take root in the harshest conditions on Earth. But their greatest challenge still lay ahead, and it would require an engineering breakthrough that defied everything we thought we knew about Ice Age construction techniques. The year was 26,000 BCE, and the Gravettian people faced their first existential crisis. The climate was getting worse. What archaeologists call the last glacial maximum was beginning, a period when global temperatures would drop so low that ice sheets would expand to their greatest extent in over 100,000 years. For the Gravettian communities that had spent 2 millennia perfecting their Arctic survival techniques, this presented a terrifying reality. Their existing technology was about to become inadequate. Ice core samples from Greenland revealed the shocking speed of this climate change. In some regions, average temperatures dropped by 15 degrees Celsius in less than a century. Winters that had once been survivable with advanced clothing and fat-burning lamps suddenly became death sentences. Archaeological evidence shows that several Gravettian settlements were simply abandoned during this period, their inhabitants presumably frozen or forced to retreat south. But not all of them retreated. At a site near what is now Brno in the Czech Republic, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of something extraordinary, a Gravettian community that not only survived the onset of the last glacial maximum, but actually expanded during this period. The secret lies in what researchers initially dismissed as impossible: underground heating systems so sophisticated they wouldn't be matched until the Roman Empire. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young hunter whose name is lost to history, but whose innovation saved his entire community. While examining the frozen ground around their settlement, he noticed something curious. Areas where they had been burying ash and organic waste remained unfrozen even during the coldest periods. The decomposing organic matter was generating heat through bacterial action, creating warm zones beneath the surface. This observation led to one of the most remarkable engineering achievements of the prehistoric world, explains Dr. Randall White from New York University, a leading expert on Gravettian technology. They developed a system of underground heat distribution that could maintain above freezing temperatures throughout an entire settlement, even when surface temperatures dropped below -40 degrees Celsius. The system worked through principles that modern engineers recognize as geothermal heating. The Gravettians would dig elaborate networks of tunnels beneath their settlements, connecting them to central chambers where they maintained controlled decomposition of organic matter. This wasn't random composting. It was precisely managed biochemical engineering. Archaeological excavation has revealed the sophisticated understanding required for this technology. The tunnels were sized to optimize airflow, ensuring adequate oxygen reached the decomposition chambers while preventing heat loss. The central chambers were lined with stones that absorbed and radiated heat, creating thermal mass that could maintain consistent temperatures for months. But the most ingenious aspect was their fuel source. Instead of relying solely on animal waste and plant matter, they developed techniques for processing human waste in combination with mammoth dung and organic debris to create what can only be described as prehistoric biomass fuel. This mixture produced controlled, sustained heat generation that could be regulated by adjusting the composition and moisture content. The results were remarkable. Excavations at heated Gravettian sites show evidence of year-round human activity in regions where surface conditions would have made survival impossible. These communities developed specialized tools and techniques that required fine motor control, impossible with frozen fingers, indicating that their indoor environments remained comfortable enough for detailed craft work even during the harshest winter conditions. We found sewing needles with diameters of just 1.5 millimeters buried in layers dated to the height of the last glacial maximum, notes Dr. Marie Perpier from the French National Museum of Natural History. This level of precision work could only be accomplished in heated environments. These people had created comfortable living spaces in conditions that would challenge modern technology. But the underground heating systems came with a deadly risk. Carbon monoxide poisoning from poorly ventilated decomposition could kill an entire family in their sleep. The Gravettians solved this through an innovation that demonstrates their sophisticated understanding of air dynamics. They developed ventilation shafts with carefully calculated diameters that created natural convection currents, pulling toxic gases up and out while drawing fresh air down into living spaces. The precision required is staggering. Modern reconstructions show that shaft diameters just 1 centimeter too small would result in inadequate ventilation, while shafts too large would allow heat loss that made the entire system ineffective. The Gravettians had to get the calculations exactly right, and they did repeatedly across multiple sites separated by hundreds of kilometers. This period also marked the beginning of their most ambitious architectural experiments. With reliable heating systems ensuring survival, Gravettian engineers could focus on perfecting their shelter construction techniques. They began developing methods for building with the one material that was always abundant in their environment: snow and ice. But their snow architecture would prove to be more than simple shelter construction. It would become a sophisticated engineering system that transformed their deadliest enemy into their greatest ally. The most incredible discoveries were still to come, and they would reveal construction techniques that modern engineers struggle to replicate even with power tools and advanced materials. Imagine waking up on a winter morning 25,000 years ago. Outside your shelter, the temperature has dropped to minus 48 degrees Celsius overnight. The wind howls with enough force to knock a grown man off his feet, carrying ice crystals that would blind you in seconds. This is daily life for a Gravettian family, and somehow, remarkably, they not only survived but created rich, complex lives in conditions that would kill most modern humans within hours. Meet Era. Not her real name, obviously, but the identity archaeologists have assigned to a young woman whose remarkably preserved remains were discovered at the Dolní Věstonice site in the Czech Republic. Carbon dating places her death at exactly 26,000 years ago, during the height of the last glacial maximum. But Era's story isn't one of desperate survival. It's a window into a sophisticated society that had learned to thrive in Earth's harshest environment. The preservation conditions at Dolní Věstonice have provided unprecedented insight into daily life during the Ice Age. Era was approximately 25 years old when she died. An analysis of her bones reveals a life of remarkable physical activity and excellent nutrition despite the hostile environment. Isotope analysis of her teeth shows she consumed a varied diet, including mammoth meat, fish, and even fruits and vegetables that somehow remain available throughout the brutal winters. What's most striking about Era and her contemporaries is the evidence of leisure time, explains Dr. Yuri Svoboda from the Czech Academy of Sciences, who led the excavations at Dolní Věstonice. These weren't people barely clinging to existence. They were creating art, music, and complex social structures. We found carved figurines, decorated tools, and even what appears to be jewelry buried with their remains. Era's daily routine would have begun before dawn, when the family's designated firekeeper, usually a respected elder, would check the underground heating system and adjust the ventilation to optimize warmth for the coming day. This wasn't a simple task. It required understanding of air pressure, moisture control, and fuel management that took years to master. The family would eat their first meal by the light of fat-burning lamps, consuming a breakfast that might include rendered mammoth fat mixed with dried berries, smoked fish stored in underground caches, and nutritious porridge made from processed bone marrow. These meals provided a massive caloric intake, up to 6,000 calories per day, required to maintain body temperature in extreme cold. But perhaps most remarkably, the Gravettians had developed sophisticated food preservation techniques that ensured year-round nutrition. Archaeological evidence shows they created permafrost storage systems that could keep meat fresh for months, smoking and curing techniques that produced concentrated protein sources, and fermentation methods that created vitamin-rich foods essential for preventing scurvy and other deficiency diseases. Era's hands tell a particularly fascinating story. Microscopic analysis reveals callus patterns consistent with specialized tool use. Not just general crafting, but precision work requiring fine motor control. She was likely a skilled seamstress, one of the most valued members of Gravettian society. The survival of the entire community depended on the quality of their protective clothing, making experts like Era literally lifesavers. The bone needles we recovered from this period are masterpieces of precision engineering, notes Dr. Olga Soffer from the University of Illinois. They were made using techniques that required not just skill, but years of apprenticeship. We're looking at evidence of specialized craftsmanship that wouldn't be out of place in a medieval guild system. Daily life wasn't just about survival. It was about maintaining the complex social bonds that made community survival possible. Evening gatherings around communal heating systems served as more than just shared meals. They were information exchanges where hunters shared knowledge about animal movements, weather patterns, and resource locations. These sessions were literally matters of life and death, where a single piece of outdated information could lead an entire family to freeze in an unexpected storm. Children in Gravettian society faced unique challenges and remarkable opportunities. They began learning survival skills almost from birth, but archaeological evidence suggests they also had time for play and education. Carved toys have been found at multiple sites, including miniature tools that served as training devices and small animal figurines that may have been used for storytelling or educational games. The most poignant discoveries come from burial sites, where Gravettian families laid their dead to rest with grave goods that reveal deep emotional bonds and spiritual beliefs. Era herself was buried wearing a cap made from fox fur and decorated with carved mammoth ivory beads. Her grave contained tools, food offerings, and what appears to be a carved representation of her family, suggesting beliefs about afterlife that mirror those found in cultures worldwide. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Gravettian daily life was their ability to maintain hope and ambition in the face of unimaginable hardship. They were planning for the future, investing in technologies and knowledge that would benefit generations yet to come. They were laying the groundwork for humanity's greatest architectural achievement in the frozen north. The shelters they were perfecting would soon evolve into structures so advanced that modern engineers initially refused to believe they could work, until they built them and discovered the Gravettians had been right all along. By 24,000 BCE, the Gravettian people had achieved something unprecedented in human history. They had become the dominant force in the world's most hostile environment. Their mastery of Ice Age survival had reached such sophistication that they were actively expanding into territories even more extreme than those their ancestors had conquered. This wasn't just survival anymore, it was supremacy. Archaeological evidence from sites across northern and eastern Europe reveals the full extent of Gravettian dominance during this period. From the Thames Valley in England to the Ural Mountains in Russia, researchers have identified over 200 Gravettian settlements, many located in regions where winter temperatures regularly drop below -50 degrees Celsius. These weren't temporary camps or seasonal hunting stations. They were permanent communities with populations that, in some cases, exceeded 1,000 individuals. The secret to their success lay in technological innovations that had reached a level of sophistication that wouldn't be matched for millennia. Chief among these were their revolutionary snow architecture techniques, which transformed the most abundant material in their environment into engineering marvels that provided both protection and comfort. The breakthrough came from understanding that snow isn't just frozen water. It's a complex building material with properties that vary dramatically based on temperature, density, and age. The Gravettians developed construction techniques that treated different types of snow as distinct materials, each with specific applications in their architectural system. When we first discovered the remains of Gravettian snow structures at the Kostenki site in Russia, we thought we were looking at natural formations, explains Dr. Alexander Sinitsyn from the Russian Academy of Sciences. It took years of analysis to realize we were examining the remnants of engineered buildings more sophisticated than anything built by humans for the next 20,000 years. The foundation of Gravettian snow architecture was their understanding of thermodynamics. They discovered that by compacting snow to specific densities, they could create walls with insulation properties superior to modern materials. But the key insight was that different snow densities could be combined in layers to create walls that were warm on the inside, waterproof in the middle, and reflective on the outside. Construction began with site preparation that required mathematical precision. Gravettian engineers would calculate the angle of the winter sun, prevailing wind directions, and drainage patterns to position their structures for maximum thermal efficiency. Archaeological evidence shows they used sophisticated surveying techniques, employing weighted strings and sighting sticks to ensure their buildings were perfectly aligned for optimal heat capture and retention. The walls themselves represent one of history's most remarkable engineering achievements. The inner layer consisted of fine, powdered snow mixed with organic materials like ground bone and processed plant fibers. This mixture, when compacted, created insulation with thermal properties comparable to modern foam. The middle layer was built from packed snow that had been aged and processed to remove air pockets, creating a waterproof barrier. The outer layer consisted of ice blocks, snow that had been melted and refrozen under controlled conditions to create a reflective surface that redirected heat back into the structure. But the most ingenious aspect of Gravettian snow architecture was their heating integration system. Rather than building heating systems separately from their shelters, they incorporated heat distribution directly into the structural design. Channels carved into the foundation allowed warm air from their underground heating systems to circulate through hollow spaces in the walls themselves, creating structures that were heated from within. The thermal efficiency is extraordinary, notes Dr. Brian Fagan from the University of California, who has studied reconstructions of Gravettian snow buildings. Modern tests show these structures could maintain interior temperatures of 15 to 20 degrees Celsius when exterior temperatures dropped to minus 40. They were more energy efficient than many contemporary homes. The scale of some Gravettian snow structures defies everything we thought we knew about Ice Age architecture. At the Mazyrik site in Ukraine, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of buildings with floor areas exceeding 400 square meters, larger than many modern houses. These weren't simple shelters but complex, multi-room structures with specialized areas for different activities: food preparation, tool manufacturing, sleeping quarters, and even dedicated spaces for social gatherings. Construction techniques included architectural innovations that wouldn't be rediscovered until the modern era. They developed methods for creating load-bearing arches from snow, allowing them to build structures with soaring ceilings and open interior spaces. They mastered the art of creating waterproof joints between different materials, ensuring their buildings remained dry even during spring thaws. The Gravettians also understood that their buildings needed to be adaptable to changing conditions. Archaeological evidence reveals modular construction techniques that allowed structures to be expanded, modified, or even relocated as circumstances required. Some sites show evidence of buildings that were systematically dismantled and rebuilt multiple times, with residents upgrading and improving their designs based on experience. Perhaps most remarkably, they developed maintenance systems that could preserve these structures through multiple seasons. They created drainage systems to manage snowmelt, ventilation networks that prevented condensation buildup, and repair techniques that could restore damaged sections without compromising the entire structure. But their success would soon face its greatest test, and the very perfection of their technology would become the source of their downfall. Success breeds complacency, and by 23,000 BCE, the Gravettian mastery of Ice Age survival had begun to contain the seeds of their own destruction. Their technology had become so effective, their community so secure, that they had forgotten the fundamental truth that had driven their ancestors' innovations. In a world of ice and death, adaptability meant survival, and perfection could be a fatal trap. The warning signs appeared first in their most successful settlements. Archaeological evidence from the peak period sites reveals something troubling: technological stagnation. For the first time in their 2,000-year history, Gravettian tool design stopped evolving. The same needle patterns, the same lamp configurations, the same architectural techniques were being replicated exactly across generations, with no modifications or improvements. What we see in the archaeological record is a classic case of technological overconfidence, explains Dr. Lawrence Strauss from the University of New Mexico. The Gravettians had developed systems so effective that they stopped questioning whether they could be improved. This kind of stagnation is often a precursor to civilizational collapse. The first cracks appeared in their food procurement systems. For generations, Gravettian communities had relied on hunting large Ice Age megafauna: mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, giant bison, animals that provided enormous quantities of meat, fat, and materials with relatively little risk. Their hunting techniques had become so refined that they could take down these massive creatures with remarkable efficiency. But efficiency had bred overexploitation. Isotope analysis of bones from late-period Gravettian sites reveals declining animal populations across their territories. The very success of their hunting technology was destroying the resource base that made their survival possible. Mammoth populations, in particular, show evidence of severe stress, with archaeological evidence suggesting that some herds were being hunted to extinction in local areas. The Gravettians' response to this crisis reveals how their technological success had become a psychological prison. Rather than adapting their techniques to hunt smaller, more sustainable prey, they doubled down on their existing methods. They developed even more sophisticated mammoth hunting techniques, created more efficient processing systems, and expanded their territorial range to find new herds to exploit. This expansion brought them into conflict with other human groups for the first time in their history. Previous archaeological evidence shows the Gravettians had largely existed in isolation, their superior technology allowing them to occupy territories that other humans couldn't survive in. But as they pushed into new regions in search of megafauna, they encountered other peoples who had developed their own survival strategies. The results were catastrophic. Sites from this period show evidence of warfare on a scale previously unknown in the archaeological record. Gravettian settlements bear traces of systematic destruction, not from natural disasters or abandonment, but from deliberate human attack. Mass graves contain individuals who died from weapon wounds, their bodies showing evidence of trauma that could only come from organized violence. But the external conflicts were nothing compared to the internal rot that was consuming Gravettian society. Their communities had grown so large and their survival systems so complex that they required unprecedented levels of cooperation to maintain. Archaeological evidence suggests that by this period, some Gravettian settlements housed over 1,500 individuals, populations that strained the social systems that had evolved to manage much smaller groups. The specialization that had once been their strength became a source of vulnerability. Communities became dependent on master craftspeople whose knowledge was essential for survival, but was held by only a few individuals. When these specialists died, whether from disease, accident, or violence, entire communities could lose critical survival capabilities overnight. We see evidence of technological knowledge loss at multiple sites, notes Dr. Margherita Musi from the University of Rome. Suddenly, communities that had been producing sophisticated tools and maintaining complex heating systems were reverting to much cruder technologies. It's as if the knowledge base was fragmenting. The most damaging development was the emergence of social stratification based on technological knowledge. Archaeological evidence suggests that communities began dividing into distinct classes: the technology holders who possessed critical survival knowledge, and the laborers who performed basic tasks but couldn't maintain or repair the systems their lives depended on. This created a dangerous dependency that made communities vulnerable to internal conflict and knowledge loss. Climate data from ice cores reveals that during the same period, weather patterns were becoming more unpredictable. The stable, extremely cold conditions that had characterized the last glacial maximum were giving way to more variable weather, with sudden temperature swings that could render carefully calibrated survival systems ineffective overnight. The Gravettians' fixed technological responses, perfected for stable conditions, became liabilities in this changing environment. Their elaborate underground heating systems, designed for consistent extreme cold, couldn't adapt to rapid temperature fluctuations. Their snow architecture, calculated for predictable snow conditions, failed when weather patterns changed. Perhaps most tragically, their very success had bred a kind of technological arrogance that prevented them from recognizing the signs of impending crisis. They had conquered the impossible once. Surely they could do it again. But the forces gathering against them would soon prove that even the greatest technological achievements could crumble when the world itself began to change. The end was coming, and it would arrive faster than anyone could have imagined. To understand how the Gravettian survival system actually worked, you need to comprehend engineering principles so advanced that modern experts initially refused to believe Ice Age humans could have developed them. This wasn't primitive technology. It was a sophisticated integration of thermodynamics, material science, and architectural engineering that created livable environments in conditions that would challenge contemporary survival experts. The foundation of everything was their revolutionary understanding of heat management. While earlier humans had simply built fires and hoped for warmth, the Gravettians had discovered that survival in extreme cold required treating heat as a precious resource that needed to be captured, stored, distributed, and conserved with mathematical precision. Their breakthrough came from observing how certain animals survived Arctic conditions. Archaeological evidence suggests they studied the denning behaviors of Arctic foxes, the thermal properties of bird feathers, and the fat storage systems of marine mammals. But rather than simply copying nature, they engineered solutions that improved upon biological systems. The process began with fuel preparation. Gravettian communities developed industrial-scale fat rendering operations that could process entire mammoths with zero waste. Every scrap of fat, marrow, and fatty tissue was carefully extracted and purified using techniques that wouldn't be matched until the development of modern petroleum refining. The sophistication of their fat processing is remarkable, explains Dr. Eric Putcher from the Natural History Museum, Vienna. They understood that different types of animal fat had different burning characteristics and developed blending techniques that created custom fuel mixtures for specific applications. Some mixtures burn hot and fast for cooking, others burn slowly and steadily for heating, and still others produce minimal smoke for indoor use. The rendering process itself required precise temperature control. Too hot, and the fat would burn, producing toxic smoke and wasting precious fuel. Too cool, and impurities wouldn't separate properly, creating fuel that burned poorly and clogged their sophisticated lamp systems. The Gravettians solved this by developing controlled rendering techniques using heated stones that maintain exact temperatures for hours at a time. Their lamp technology represents one of prehistory's greatest engineering achievements. These weren't simple bowls with floating wicks. They were precision instruments with carefully calculated chamber geometries that optimized combustion efficiency. Archaeological analysis reveals that lamp designs varied based on intended use. Broad, shallow chambers for maximum heat output, deep chambers with narrow openings for long-duration burning, and specialized designs with multiple wicks for adjustable heat levels. The wicks themselves were masterpieces of materials engineering, made from processed plant fibers, animal fur, and even human hair. They were crafted to specific diameters and densities that control burn rates with remarkable precision. Some wicks were designed to burn completely away, creating self-extinguishing lamps for safety. Others were engineered for continuous burning, with replacement systems that could maintain flames for weeks at a time. But individual heating was only part of their system. The real breakthrough was their development of community-scale heat distribution networks. Archaeological evidence from the largest Gravettian sites reveals underground tunnel systems that carried warm air throughout entire settlements, creating centralized heating that could maintain comfortable temperatures in dozens of structures simultaneously. These heating networks required understanding of air pressure dynamics that wouldn't be formally codified until the development of modern physics. The Gravettians had to calculate tunnel diameters, vent placements, and air flow patterns with mathematical precision. Get the calculations wrong, and the system would either fail to distribute heat effectively or create dangerous carbon monoxide buildups that could kill entire families. When we modeled their heating systems using modern computational fluid dynamics software, we were amazed at how optimal their designs were. Notes Dr. Jean Klotz from the French Ministry of Culture. These people were conducting advanced engineering calculations in their heads, using only practical experience and intuitive understanding of physics principles. The construction techniques for their snow and ice architecture required even greater precision. Archaeological evidence reveals that they developed standardized measurement systems based on human body proportions, allowing builders to create structures with consistent dimensions and engineering properties. They understood load distribution, thermal expansion, and structural dynamics well enough to build multi-story buildings from materials that most people consider impossible to work with. Their most sophisticated innovation was the integration of all these systems into a unified survival technology. Heating systems were designed to work seamlessly with architectural systems. Clothing technologies were coordinated with shelter designs to create layered protection systems. Food storage techniques were integrated with heating systems to prevent spoilage while maintaining accessibility. The social organization required to maintain these technologies was equally remarkable. Archaeological evidence suggests highly specialized roles: master firekeepers who maintained heating systems, expert builders who supervised construction projects, skilled clothing manufacturers who created protective gear, and system coordinators who managed the integration of different technologies. Training for these roles began in childhood and continued throughout adult life. The knowledge was too complex and too critical for casual transmission. Communities developed formal education systems with apprenticeships, testing procedures, and quality control measures that ensured technological knowledge was preserved and transmitted accurately across generations. But this very sophistication would soon become their greatest vulnerability. Systems that worked perfectly under stable conditions would prove catastrophically fragile when the world itself began to change. The coming collapse would reveal the fatal flaw in their technological mastery. 22,000 years ago, the world began to end for the Gravettian people, not through war, disaster, or disease, but through something far more insidious: the gradual transformation of the very environment their entire civilization had been engineered to survive. Climate data from ice cores reveals that around this time, the stable, extremely cold conditions of the last glacial maximum began giving way to the first signs of what scientists now call the last glacial transition. Average temperatures started rising, not dramatically, just a few degrees over several centuries, but enough to fundamentally alter the environment that had remained constant for over 6,000 years. For a people whose survival depended on precise technological calibration to specific conditions, even small environmental changes were catastrophic. The Gravettians had spent millennia perfecting systems designed for temperatures that rarely rose above -30 degrees Celsius. When average temperatures began climbing toward -20 degrees, everything began to fail. Their snow architecture, which had been the foundation of their dominance, was the first casualty. The structural calculations that had worked perfectly for thousands of years became dangerously unreliable. Snow that had previously packed into solid, load-bearing walls now became unstable slush that collapsed without warning. Buildings that had sheltered families for generations became death traps that could crush their occupants during unexpected warm spells. Archaeological evidence from this period tells a story of desperate adaptation attempts. At sites across their former territories, researchers have found evidence of increasingly crude construction techniques as communities struggle to modify their building methods for changing conditions. The precision engineering that had once been their hallmark gave way to rough, inefficient structures that provided minimal protection from the elements. The archaeological record shows a clear pattern of technological regression, explains Dr. Pavel Delukhanov from Newcastle University. Communities that have been building sophisticated multi-room structures were suddenly constructing simple, single-chamber shelters. It's as if they were watching their accumulated knowledge become useless before their eyes. The heating systems that had been the core of their survival strategy proved equally vulnerable to climate change. Underground heating networks designed for permafrost conditions began failing as ground temperatures rose above freezing for longer periods each year. The carefully calculated decomposition chambers that had provided steady heat for centuries began producing inconsistent temperatures as bacterial activity changed in response to warmer conditions. Worse yet, Their fuel supply was disappearing. The megafauna that had provided the fat reserves essential for their heating systems were dying out, not from hunting pressure alone, but from habitat changes caused by the shifting climate. Mammoth populations that had survived the harshest conditions of the Ice Age couldn't adapt to the warming world. As these massive animals vanished, they took with them the foundation of Gravettian energy technology, the clothing systems that had enabled human survival in minus 50-degree conditions became actively dangerous in the changing climate. The multi-layered garments designed to prevent heat loss became heat traps during unexpected warm periods, causing dangerous overheating that could lead to dehydration and death. Archaeological evidence suggests that many Gravettians died not from cold, but from hyperthermia as their perfectly engineered survival gear became a liability. But the most devastating impact was on their food systems. The Gravettians had developed sophisticated preservation techniques based on natural refrigeration in permanently frozen ground. As temperatures rose and permafrost began melting seasonally, their food storage systems failed catastrophically. Entire communities faced starvation as their preserved food supplies rotted in suddenly thawed storage pits. The social consequences were even more severe than the technological failures. Gravettian society had been built around the specialized knowledge required to maintain their complex survival systems. As those systems became obsolete, the social hierarchies based on technical expertise collapsed overnight. Master craftspeople who had once been the most valued members of society found themselves possessing worthless knowledge, while community leaders who had coordinated complex technological systems had nothing left to coordinate. Archaeological evidence from late-period sites shows increasing signs of social breakdown. Tool quality declined dramatically as master craftspeople died without passing on their skills to apprentices who no longer saw value in learning obsolete techniques. Community cooperation, essential for maintaining large-scale heating and construction projects, gave way to smaller family groups that couldn't support sophisticated technologies. The final blow came from competition with other human populations who had developed different survival strategies. As the climate warmed and new territories became habitable, groups that had been excluded from Gravettian territories during the height of the Ice Age began expanding into regions where Gravettian communities were struggling to adapt. These competing groups brought technologies optimized for milder conditions, lighter clothing, portable shelters, and hunting techniques designed for smaller game animals. In the changing environment, these primitive technologies proved more adaptable than the sophisticated Gravettian systems. It's a classic case of overspecialization leading to evolutionary disadvantage, notes Dr. Clive Gamble from Royal Holloway University. The Gravettians had become so perfectly adapted to extreme conditions that they couldn't adapt when those conditions changed. Their technological sophistication became their weakness. By 21,000 years ago, most Gravettian settlements had been abandoned. Archaeological evidence suggests that some communities attempted to migrate south to regions where their technologies might still be viable, but these refugees found territories already occupied by other groups who had no reason to welcome them. The end came not with dramatic battles or natural disasters, but with quiet abandonment. Sites that have been continuously occupied for thousands of years were simply left empty, their sophisticated technologies gradually buried under accumulating snow and ice, waiting for modern archaeologists to discover and marvel at achievements that would never be equaled. But in their final moments, some Gravettian communities managed one last remarkable achievement. They preserved their knowledge for the future, leaving behind evidence that would eventually inspire the very technologies we rely on today. The final chapter of the Gravettian story unfolds in a handful of remote sites scattered across Eastern Europe, where the last communities of ice masters made their desperate stand against a changing world. These weren't the grand settlements of their peak period, but small, isolated groups clinging to the techniques that had once made them masters of the frozen world. Archaeological evidence from the Kostenki-Borshchivo complex in Russia reveals the extraordinary lengths to which these final communities want to preserve their technological heritage. Rather than simply abandoning their techniques, as most Gravettian groups had done, these holdout communities began creating what can only be described as technological libraries, deliberate caches of tools, materials, and instructional artifacts designed to preserve their knowledge for future generations. The most remarkable discovery came in 1955, when Soviet archaeologists uncovered what they initially thought was a standard Gravettian tool cache. But careful analysis revealed something unprecedented. A systematic collection of every type of tool, material sample, and technical component used in Ice Age survival technology, carefully packaged and stored with apparent instructions for use. This wasn't just a toolkit, explains Dr. Konstantin Merkinov from the Russian Academy of Sciences. It was a comprehensive survival manual created by people who knew their way of life was ending. They were trying to preserve 20,000 years of accumulated knowledge in a form that future humans might be able to understand and use. The cache contained over 300 individual items, including examples of every type of bone needle used in Gravettian clothing construction, samples of different fat processing techniques, miniature models of heating system components, and even what appears to be a three-dimensional instruction manual for snow architecture construction. Each item was carefully selected to represent a critical aspect of their survival technology. But perhaps most remarkably, the cache included materials that the creators clearly intended as gifts for whoever might find them. Alongside the technical items were finished goods of extraordinary quality, carved ivory ornaments, perfectly preserved clothing items, and tools of such exquisite craftsmanship that they could only have been created by master artisans working at the peak of their abilities. This wasn't just preservation. It was communication across time. The final Gravettian communities were trying to speak to the future, to share the techniques that had enabled human survival in Earth's harshest environment. They were creating a message that would wait 20,000 years for someone capable of understanding it. The individuals who created these preservation efforts were clearly among the most skilled members of their communities. Isotope analysis of bones found at these sites reveals people who maintained excellent nutrition even as their societies collapsed around them. These were the master craftspeople, the system engineers, the knowledge keepers who have been the backbone of Gravettian civilization. What's most moving about these final sites is the evidence of deliberate choice, notes Dr. Marjolaine Bosch from Leiden University. These people could have migrated south, could have joined other communities, could have abandoned their traditions and adapted to changing conditions. Instead, they chose to stay and preserve what they saw as essential human knowledge. The preservation process required enormous sacrifice. Creating comprehensive tool collections meant using precious materials that could have been employed for immediate survival needs. The time and energy spent on documentation and storage came at the cost of food procurement and shelter maintenance. These communities were literally dying to preserve their knowledge. Archaeological evidence suggests that some of these preservation efforts were intergenerational projects. Radiocarbon dating shows that some caches were added to over periods of several centuries, with successive generations contributing new items and maintaining the storage systems created by their ancestors. This represents planning on a scale that defies everything we thought we knew about hunter-gatherer societies. The final Gravettian communities also made one last technological breakthrough that demonstrates the innovative spirit that had driven their ancestors. Faced with changing conditions that made their traditional techniques obsolete, they developed hybrid technologies that combine Gravettian engineering principles with adaptations for warmer climates. Archaeological evidence reveals experimental heating systems that could function in both frozen and thawed ground conditions, clothing designs that incorporated adjustable insulation for variable temperatures, and architectural techniques that created structures stable in both snow and mud conditions. These weren't crude compromises, but sophisticated engineering solutions that attempted to preserve the effectiveness of Gravettian technology while adapting to new environmental realities. But innovation couldn't overcome the fundamental problem. Their communities were too small and too isolated to maintain the complex social systems required for their technology. The knowledge was there, the materials were available, but the human networks needed to implement large-scale survival systems had been broken by population decline and geographic isolation. The end came quietly. The last dated artifacts from definitively Gravettian sites cluster around 19,000 years ago, then simply stop. There are no signs of violence, no evidence of natural disasters, no dramatic events to mark the end of humanity's first great technological civilization. The people who had conquered the Ice Age simply faded away, leaving behind only their carefully preserved gifts to the future. But their influence didn't disappear entirely. Genetic studies suggest that some Gravettian populations integrated with other human groups, carrying their knowledge into new communities. Archaeological evidence shows Gravettian techniques appearing in later cultures, adapted and modified but recognizably derived from Ice Age innovations. The last masters of the ice had accomplished something extraordinary. They had ensured that their greatest achievements would survive even when their civilization could not. Today, when modern survival experts venture into Earth's most hostile environments, they carry equipment that would be instantly recognizable to a Gravettian engineer from 30,000 years ago. Our advanced cold weather clothing systems still rely on the same multi-layer principles they pioneered. Our understanding of fat as a high-energy fuel source echoes their sophisticated rendering techniques. Our most advanced Arctic architecture still struggles to match the thermal efficiency of their snow construction methods. The Gravettians left us more than just survival techniques. They left us a profound lesson about human adaptability and the double-edged nature of technological mastery. Their story reminds us that even the most sophisticated technologies are only as resilient as the environments they're designed for, and that success itself can become a trap when the world begins to change. In our own age of climate change, the Gravettian experience offers both inspiration and warning. They showed us that humans can develop technology sophisticated enough to thrive in any environment, but they also demonstrated that overspecialization can become a fatal vulnerability when conditions shift. Perhaps most importantly, they showed us the power of knowledge preservation. Those final communities, dying in their remote settlements, made the conscious choice to document and preserve their achievements for future generations. Their technological caches, buried in the permafrost of millennia, have given us insights that inform modern survival science and inspire contemporary innovation. Their legacy lives on in the genetic heritage they passed to later human populations, in the archaeological record that continues to astound researchers, and the fundamental human drive to push beyond the limits of what seems possible. Every time we develop new technologies to survive in extreme environments, we're following the footsteps of people who looked at a world of ice and death and decided to call it home. This wasn't just about surviving the cold. It was about the unlimited capacity of human ingenuity to transform the impossible into the inevitable. And even today, in our heated homes and climate-controlled world, their spirit of innovation still echoes in everything we do to push the boundaries of human survival.